All right, now we see that Joseph was going to be sold off to slavery. And we'll talk a little more about this in a second, but part of what happens is I'll just read this. I'll explain it a little bit more. No, you know something? I'm going to wait to read this. I'm going to wait to read that. I'm going to read it. I'll read it in a minute. All right. So what we've been doing so far, we've talked about Adam and Eve, right? Talked about Cain and Abel. Talked about Noah. We talked about Nimrod, Tower of Babel. We talked about Abraham and Sarah. What a joy Abraham has been with her. Then we saw Abraham and Lot and his, what a great guy he was. And then we see Abraham and Isaac, and Abraham once again being faithful and almost killing his son. So yeah, so a lot of intrigue. Genesis, man, if you haven't read it, read it. It is like there's sex, there's murder, there's intrigue. No? Okay, all right. Anyway, it's there's even incest in there, which is like, ew. Yeah, it's in there. The Bible doesn't hide any of that stuff. It's it's all there. Didn't know it? Well, you read it, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I'm telling you. Okay. So now we're continuing, and we read it from Genesis 24. And so what happens is Isaac, right, Abraham, Isaac, the promised son, he ends up marrying Rebekah. She's gorgeous. Isaac ends up doing the same thing his dad does, tells Abimelech. Now, we don't know if it's the same Abimelech, but he's the king in the Philistine area. Says, hey, Rebekah, if you ask, you're my sister, okay? So chip off the old block, Isaac, to spare his own neck. And then she's taken, and Abimelech has a dream, and basically God says to him, you're a dead man. And he's like, wait, what? And he's like, you took a married woman. He's like, I didn't know. So anyway, so Isaac goes free. Rebekah is saved. But Rebekah evidently was very attractive. Like, did you know that Sarah was like 75 years old when Sarah was like 75 years old when Pharaoh was like, oh, how you doing? You know? I was like, all right, they got some good genes, evidently, because she was very attractive and as an older lady that even a king wanted her in his harem. So anyway. Isaac and Rebekah have twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Esau says Esau means hairy. And the reason why he was called hairy because he came out evidently super hairy. Looked like a little hedgehog or something, I don't know. But he was a hairy man, and he was red. And later his nickname becomes Edom, which means red, because something to do with the soup that his brother was making. Anyway, his name was Red. So Edom, that's his nickname. He becomes the father of the Edomites, which were always fighting the Israelites, right? Okay, so they're all family. Let's just put it that way. Some of you come from some crazy families, right? Right? Well, this one, I guarantee you, was worse, okay? They're killing each other, all right? So Jacob, who was the younger, his name means deceiver. And he was very deceptive. He and his mom worked to deceive Dad because Dad was starting to go blind. Esau was the firstborn of the twins, but yet, when he was supposed to get the blessing from his dad, Rebekah puts this animal's hair on Jacob's arm and says, go to your father. Since they're twins, I'm sure they sounded similar. He's gonna rub your arm to make sure you're you, which is Esau, but you're not Esau, you're Jacob. Esau was this hunter, like really manly man, and Jacob was kind of like, well, I like soup and things. So sorry, I'm just saying he was just a little more, less, he was it was like I used to compare him to me and my brother. I was like at home, I'm like, yeah, I'm all right. I'm mama's boy, and my brother's all like, yeah, let's go out and kill some. So not quite that bad, but anyway. And so he sits down and he goes and he pretends to be Esau. Dad feels his arm and it's like super hairy. So he's like, oh, good. Gives him the blessing instead of Esau. And Esau's like, wait, what? I'm going to kill you. And so Jacob takes off. And he runs to his uncle, his mom's brother's house, right? Oh, excuse me. Yeah, to Laban, which is Rebekah's brother. And so he runs over there, and this is where he meets his future wife. Okay, so we following right now? Okay, Jacob, Esau. Jacob deceives, gets the blessing, and he hightails it out because Esau, that hairy man, is really angry, and Jacob doesn't have a chance against Esau. So he hightails it out of there, goes to Laban's house, and he sees Rachel, and he's like, Hoa, right? Rachel was his cousin once removed. You all know what that means, right? Cousin once removed. Wasn't second cousin, it's a cousin once removed. That's the daughter of his cousin. Remember that. I'm going to test you on what a cousin once removed is later on. That stuff confusing. Whoa. Anyway, his cousin once removed is Rachel, and he's like, I want to marry Rachel. And Laban's like, okay, work for me for 7 years, and you'll get her. 7 years? I mean, she's pretty hot. Okay, we'll do it. He works for him for 7 years. The night of their marriage comes. She's in a veil. She's all psyched. He comes in. He takes off the veil, and it's her sister. Laban tricks him. He deceives the deceiver. Takes the firstborn daughter, because he needs to get rid of her first. Laban. So he's like, here. And he's like, wait, you deceived me. And he's like, what, who, me? Well, she's your wife now. He says, well, what do I got to do to get Rachel? And he says, work for me for another 7 years. Rachel had to be pretty amazing. So 7 more years he works, and he finally gets Rachel. And in the meantime, Leah, his first wife, she's fertile myrtle, man. She's having kids like crazy. She's popping them out, boy after boy after boy. This is part of the 12 tribes, right? So Leah's having it. Rachel isn't having any kids. And Rachel is obviously his favorite. And so we have Reuben, his firstborn, Simeon, these are all sons of Leah, Levi, Judah. Then Bilhah, for some reason, she's producing kids, so I don't know why. She gives Jacob her handmaid, Bilhah, but he ends up having Dan from Bilhah, which was, Rachel's handmaid. Naphtali also was Bilhah, mom. Mom was Bilhah, Naphtali. Then you had Gad, which was Zilpah, which is the handmaid, another handmaid, right? And then you have Joseph. And Rachel finally has a kid. And that's why Jacob is so in love with Joseph. Because it's the product of the wife that he adores. So Joseph is a spoiled brat. And we saw, I don't think he was clueless when he went out there and was sharing all of these things with his brothers. Because Joseph was the sheep tender. He was just out there chilling out, chewing on, long grass and straw. And the boys are all out there working their tails off, the rest of the 10. And he'd go out there and like, oh, did you guys see my coat? I look fabulous. And then all of the brothers were like, oh my gosh, I hate you. I hate you. I hate you. And then he goes and tells them his dreams about how they're all going to bow down to him. They didn't know it was a foresight. They're just like, he's being a little jerk. So, we see Joseph being thrown in the pit, right? They stripped his coat off, and they sold him to some Arab traders. Joseph ends up going to a dude's named Potiphar. Does that ring a bell for any of you, Potiphar? So he's in Potiphar's house. Potiphar is Pharaoh's chief security guard in the palace. Potiphar's an incredibly important dude. He and his wife are there, and Joseph is one of her servants. Well, one of the servants, excuse me, one of the servants. Slaves. They were slaves. And Joseph, he's a young guy. He comes from Joseph, I guess, was a very attractive guy. Comes from a long line of hotties, okay? And he's in there, and he's working, and Pharaoh's wife keeps harassing him and says, hey, come, excuse me, Potiphar, thank you. Potiphar's wife keeps saying, hey, come sleep with me. He's like, no thanks. Now, this is an interesting dilemma here because he's a slave. And slaves don't have any rights. They have 0 rights. For him to sleep with Potiphar's wife would be a normal thing if that's what she wanted. Okay? But he keeps saying no to her. Now, the scripture says that he's like, I can't do this to your husband or to my God. I can't sin against them. There could be other reasons like, ew. Like I just... you're ugly, or I don't know, I'm just saying, I'm just throwing it out there because he too is human, but he kept saying no. Now, I don't know why, maybe he had that option, because maybe a man had a little bit more, even as a male slave, because it seems like the female servants, they all got to sleep with whomever, right? They don't have any options there. But the guy seems to have the ability, and maybe Potiphar was like, yo, honey, if he doesn't want to do that, then I'm cool with that, obviously. I don't know. I have no idea. But he was Egyptian, so he doesn't have the same moral codes as a Hebrew would have anyway. I don't know. So Joseph keeps saying no and no, and then finally Potiphar's wife is getting tired of this impetuous little jerk saying no to me. He's a slave, for Pete's sake. So she yells, she grabs a hold of him, and she says, I said sleep with me. And he takes off without his, cloak. So he runs out there in his skivvies. And she yells, rape. Yeah, she was not happy. So she yells rape. All these guards come, and there's Joseph in his skivvies. And he's like, no, I didn't do that. Too late. So he winds up in prison. So while in prison, instead of getting beheaded or getting killed, while he's in prison, he meets some people. One was the cupbearer of the Pharaoh. And this cupbearer was in prison for something, because Pharaoh's like a godlike character, so he can just throw people in prison, kill them, do whatever. The cupbearer is the one who drinks things to make sure they're not poison. So he's in there, and he ends up getting out. He tells, Pharaoh is beginning to talk about these dreams he's having. He's having these dreams, and God gives Joseph the ability, it seems, to interpret dreams. So he told the cupbearer about some of these dreams he had, and he answered the cupbearer's understanding of the cupbearer's dream when he was in prison. So Joseph is telling him this stuff, so the cupbearer goes, oh, wait, dude, I know a man in prison right now. I think he can help. He interpreted my dreams. He's like, well, bring him up. So Joseph goes into Pharaoh. Here's the dreams. He said, listen, there's going to be 7 amazing years, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. So you need to start storing up food for the famine while the years are good. Because there's going to be 14 years, 7 years good, 7 years horrible. So they start doing it. Joseph goes from prison to number 2 in the Egyptian kingdom. Joseph he's doing some amazing things. He's fantastic. And things are happening. And Pharaoh is collecting. He's like, man, the harvest is amazing. He's like, yeah, let's do it. They build these silos, and they're storing all of this food. All right, now we're in 47. Chapter 47. And I'm going to read verses 13 through 27. All right, so So meanwhile, the famine became so severe that all the food was used up. So the 7 years of famine started coming, and it was horrible. And in Egypt, it was the land of Canaan and Egypt. So, by selling grain to the people, Joseph eventually collected all the money in all of Egypt and the whole region of Canaan. And he put that money in Pharaoh's treasury. And when the people of Egypt and Canaan ran out of money, all the Egyptians came to Joseph. They're the only ones with any food, the Egyptians, because they've been storing up. Our money is gone, they cried, but please give us food, or we will die before your very eyes. And Joseph replied, well, since your money's gone, bring me your livestock. I will give you food in exchange for your livestock. So they brought their livestock to Joseph. That seemed like their only means. I guess they're going to say, well, they're going to starve anyway. So in exchange for food, in exchange for their horses, flocks, and sheep, and goats, and herds, and cattle, and donkey, and Joseph provided food for them for another year. But that year ended. The next year that came again, and they said, we cannot hide the truth from you, my Lord. Our money is gone, and our livestock and cattle are yours. We have nothing left to give you but our bodies and our land. Why should we die before your very eyes? Buy us and our land in exchange for food. We offer our land and ourselves as slaves for Pharaoh. Just give us grain so we may live and not die, and so the land does not become empty and desolate. So Joseph said, okay. And he bought all the land for Egypt, of Egypt for Pharaoh. All the Egyptians sold their fields because the famine was so severe, and soon all the land, both in Egypt and Canaan, belonged to Pharaoh. And for the people he made, all of them slaves. This is Joseph now. All of them slaves from one end of Egypt to the other. The only land that he did not buy was a land belonging to the priests, the Egyptian priests. They received an allotment of food directly from Pharaoh, so they didn't need to sell their land. Then Joseph said to the people, look, today I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh. I will provide you with seed so you can plant the fields. And when you harvest it, okay, he's not done. When you harvest it, 1/5 of your crops will belong to Pharaoh. So not only are they slaves, 1/5 of everything they make for themselves belongs to Pharaoh. You may keep the remaining 4/5 as seeds for your fields and as food for your households and for your little ones. Well, you have saved our lives, they exclaimed. May it please you, my Lord, to let us be Pharaoh's servants. Joseph then issued a decree still in effect in the land of Egypt at that point, that Pharaoh should receive 1/5 of all crops grown in his land. Only the land belonged to the priests. Only the land belonging to the priests was not given to Pharaoh. Meanwhile, the people of Israel settled in the region of Goshen in Egypt. They were acquired property, and they were fruitful, and their populations grew rapidly. So Israel ended up going into that area. So how does that make you feel? So Traded Joe ends up selling out to the man, it would seem, right? I mean, this guy was doing so well. And then he gets power, and then he starts doing everything for Pharaoh, for the man. Any of you ex-hippies? You know, power the people, down with the man, you know? No, he was all about it. He was living the dream. He knows what it's like to be living good. He knows what it's like to be in prison. He knows now what it's like to have power. And the thing with power is it tends to corrupt. And so Joseph could have done things differently, but he didn't. People read this and they're like, wow, he was such a faithful man. God blessed him, so this is the way I should probably do business. This is how people say it's okay to have slaves, right? Because these people were like, hey, government, We're going to die without your help. Enslave us. We'll do whatever you tell us. You just, as long as we don't die. It is amazing what people are willing to give up with the threat of death. And it's like those who have power, those who threaten. Now, you don't have to be someone with a lot of authority to have a lot of threat. You can threaten people just because you're bigger than them. We see this all throughout Scripture. We've talked about this. The whole thing with, I think part of it was the Tower of Babel. The whole thing with the Tower of Babel was, here's someone who has new and improved weapons. Right? And they're terrifying and they're scary. And God's like, I don't want people to have that kind of dominance over other people. I want you to be free. I don't want you to be enslaved. If you find yourself enslaved, don't worry. I will take care of you. Now, Joseph, fortunately, redeems himself later on. We'll probably get to that later. But in the moment, he's willing to give up everything. And it's all based, and none of it was like, he's like, hey, it's your option. They're the ones who said, please take me. Please enslave us, because at least we'll live another day. He could have said, no, that's fine. Listen, you work, you give a certain percentage to us, you know. He enslaves them, and then he says, take a fifth and give it to us. Just to survive, I'm going to tax you a fifth of what you make for yourselves, just so we can continue to prosper and to have more. That's insane. And yet this is a man of God. He's a Hebrew in places of power. And I think, Lord, I pray for those in positions of power. Because there's always that. And it doesn't take much, right? You ever have a jerk boss who's just on a power trip? You've had those, right? And they just love being able to tell you what to do. And it's and some people say, I'm not dealing with this, I'm done, I'm out, and they quit. Other people are like, I can't afford to quit. I got to stick it out. I got to figure out a way to survive in this. Because I don't have the convenience of being able to quit a job or to stop doing something. When we were in New York City, in Brooklyn, there would be these, I guess you would call them street-level thugs that had a certain amount of power because they belonged to, what we would call gangs. They called them nations. And you knew that if you crossed one of them, you cross all of them. So it's not only is some guy, some little person bullying you, you know that since you live there, that they represent a lot more than just the little tiny themselves. They got a whole group of people who can come after you. And so you live in a certain sense of fear because you're afraid that they're going to tell, and then it's going to be bad. There are times when we have family members and family, and maybe we're the ones who are the aggressors. But we can have power over other family members, or we can be the recipients of in a sense, the abuse the families can have. And so we find ourselves in these vulnerable positions. And maybe it has to do with where to live, or because you want to have a relationship, and so you make certain compromises, and we do certain things in order just to get along, because we're like, well, God, what am I supposed to do? So we participate in things that maybe we shouldn't be participating in. We do things, we say things, whatever those things are, and we find ourselves in these compromising positions. And sometimes we're doing something to a neighbor or to a friend or something else that we shouldn't be doing, we shouldn't be saying, we shouldn't be treating them that way. But we feel the pressure to do that because the rest of those, in order to stay in their good graces, we need to do that. There's a lot of these different weird situations that we find ourselves in where we find ourselves either as the victim of that power or the perpetrator of that power. And God's like, listen, I want you to know that you not only do not need to be there, you shouldn't be there. You can step out because I have your back, always. I don't want you to have power over. You give your power to me, and I will disperse it. As a pastor, I realize there's going to be some people, none of you, but some people who follow me. So, because you guys are, I think it's a blessing. It's a blessing that you all, most of you that I know, have a strong sense of yourself and your relationship with God. And you come here not because you feel like I have to come here because I don't know how to live unless Mike tells me how to live, right? That's not the reason why you come here. Thank God. I don't want that responsibility. I know other pastors who have that. And I'm like, Lord, keep me from ever saying things or doing something in a way that causes people to think that if they just listen to what I'm saying and do what I tell them and live the way I tell them to live, that they're going to be good with God. I'm like, I want them always to be, God, I don't know, show me. Mike says this, that sounds reasonable, but I need you to show me, God. I want to follow you, not Mike. I've seen Mike off campus. I was behind him in a car one day and watched him with a little road rage or something, I don't know. I would never be one of those families that invite cameras in, those reality shows. Oh, no. People are crazy. Anyway, but we all find ourselves in these positions of power. And we all, or like I said, all of us have some power. And those of us who tend to feel the weakest, when we finally get some element of power, and it could be simply over your little puppy. I've seen people be cruel to their animals. And I'm like, what is wrong with you, man? Don't do that. Like, how small do you have to feel in order to treat an animal poorly? How small do you have to feel to treat a child poorly? To have power over that. For some, their size and their voice gives them a certain sense of dominion over someone who's weaker. Someone maybe in their family, someone maybe they're married to, someone they're with, and they like to control that, and they like that feeling. It's like, God, keep me from ever wanting that. Because this kind of thing can happen to any of us. We either on the receiving end or on the perpetrating end. And what's amazing is Joseph's seen it all. He was a spoiled little boy, showing off to his brothers. They end up taking him out, selling him. It's it's human trafficking, man. He's being sold to these Arab traders, Ishmaelite traders, and then he goes off and he ends up being sold in Egypt, and then he becomes like second to the king after all that time in prison. He's gone from the very bottom, from the top, from the middle, I'll say, to the very bottom to the top, far as he could ever go. And you would think he was like, man, I remember what it was like to be a slave. God forbid I treat you that way. Instead, he's like, yeah, I'm taking y'all, slaving y'all. God still used him, though. He still was able to redeem himself in the end. Well, I say redeem himself. God's the one who redeemed him. I personally don't think he was doing the will of God when he's enslaving people. I think he did the will of God in storage, food storage. He could have done it differently. I don't know. I have no idea how much freedom Joseph had, but it seems like he had the freedom to represent Pharaoh completely. And he did a really good job representing Pharaoh. I don't know if he did as good of a job representing Yahweh. I don't know. I'm not going to judge him for that. But it feels wrong. And when we find ourselves in these situations, wherever we find ourselves, when we stop remembering what it was like to be rock bottom, when we forget what it's like to be treated poorly, when we forget and we save all that energy because it's just like, man, I can't wait. I can't wait till I'm able to say those I can't wait till I'm able to treat someone that way. It's like that is not the right attitude. This is not a godly attitude to be storing up all that energy just to be able to pour it out on somebody else in a very negative way. It should be like, God, thank you for having my back. Rescue me from my current situation, and may I, with grace and mercy, treat people the way you want me to treat them, not the way I feel like I should treat them. Does that make sense? Joseph is just this great example of up, down, and up. We'll talk a little bit more about that next week. All right, let's pray.